All right. Good evening, everyone out there in YouTube land. My name is Matt Yancic. I am the founder and the head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain, and welcome to Role Player with 1,000 Faces. Each week on the show, or every few weeks on the show, I interview a different creator about RPGs, the creative process, storytelling in general. And as you've guessed, if you've been tuning into my program, you know that I usually do one-on-one interviews. However, at a certain point, I realized if I were going to fulfill the 1,000 faces part of the role player with 1,000 faces, I'd have to sort of speed things up. So I would like to count tonight officially as 3 faces for role playing and storytelling. So I have with us the Solarian Games Collective. We have James Carpio, Peter Bryant, and Jayson Elliot, who have been kind enough to join a nincompoop like me on tonight's adventure. So let's see what happens. I've never had 3 guests on at once. I'm going to try and wrangle them. No guarantees. Hopefully I'll live through it. But at any rate, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. How are you doing tonight?
Good.
Yeah, pretty well.
Excellent. Okay, don't all trample over each other speaking up. That's the awkward moment where I ask how everyone's doing. Thank you so much for coming on. So as most of you know out there, probably if you're tuning in right now, so these are the masterminds behind Solarian Games, and they have a new game out called Top Secret New World Order, which has been recently published. Oh, look, there's a little plug for it right there. And I'm actually particularly excited about that because Top Secret SI was probably one of my first RPGs, like going back to when I was young, when dinosaurs walked the earth. So, gentlemen, can you tell me a little bit, before we get to that part, though, and please feel free to just sort of jump in, were you guys like creative types when you were younger, or what kind of got you into RPGs in general?
James, why don't you go first?
All right. Yeah, no, I was always that weird kid with the sketchbook all through elementary school and middle school. I was also then the weird kid with the black trench coat, eyeliner, and sketchbook in high school. And once I started playing D&D at like 15, all I did was draw monsters and demons, which kind of had some of the born again Christians in my high school a
I was
little
going to say, was
concerned
this during
about
the
me.
Satanic Panic?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So
The good old
yeah,
days.
so honestly, I had a synthesizer. I just tried everything. I just wanted to be Mr. like multimedia, bard at that point.
Right. Anyone else? Peter, Jayson?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, I started gaming in 1980, I want to say. And I made my first game in 1981. So I jumped right into making my own. It was horrible. I mean, it's terrible. I was 11 years old. And I made a game that an 11-year-old would make. And then by the time I was 18, I had made about another 12 or 13 more crappy learning how to make games. So I was always creating stuff, and much like James, I think all 3 of us are going to attest this. I think the 3 of us were all some way or another in the punk scene. I was, going to punk concerts and slam dancing and stage diving and all that good stuff. And I used to draw all over my clothes. And much like James, I drew in my notebook. I still have one of my notebooks from high school, and there's literally a doodle on every single piece of paper. I would sit and draw in class all day long. And my folks were always just like, well, why don't you pay attention in school instead of doodling all the time? It's like, I am paying attention. This is how I keep attention. Like I draw
Right.
while I'm listening, like you do on the phone when you it's maybe it's a little bit of that. I don't know. Was it people with ADD? I think they need to have something going on to like keep them from getting distracted by something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was always, and I'd paint my notebooks. Like I got my notebook, and I would get out paint, and I would paint Dead Kennedy's logos on it and stuff.
Oh my God! Did we go to the same high school? Like,
Maybe.
holy cow! Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Jason, were you also? Did you have the DK on all your notebooks, or were you? I mean,
No,
were you a punk?
I it's funny. I was a Black Flag fan. So.
Oh, okay. I met Henry Rollins. We
Nice.
should. Yeah, we should talk about that at some point.
Yeah, no, it was funny because I grew up in a small town in western Iowa with about 9,000 people, and we were the big place for people to come to. So, when I found out SST Records would actually send you mail order, I basically just bought everything in their catalog.
Were you guys?
Neat.
So is that true? Were you guys all like into punk when you were in high school? Was that like your thing?
think
Well,
so.
it's funny because I didn't get started, in terms of making things, I didn't get started with gaming. I got started with music. So, when I was younger, yeah, I mean, all the things I did as a kid would always involve, making fake magazines and fake newspapers and stuff. And
Wow.
all of that. But I started I was in bands, as a teenager, and then I started a music zine when I was 18.
Yeah.
And that actually I ended up dropping out of college because it became a business. So I was running like a goth industrial zine called Industrial Nation and another one called Permission. And, that was just basically what I did. So my scenes kind of crossed all the different punk and goth and industrial and all those things. But it's all kind of tied into gaming, I think, because, creativity is creativity.
I think so. I mean, what's really interesting is that you kind of, these are things that I sort of flirted with. The truth be told, I had a girlfriend that was a goth and was completely into like the punk scene, and so I was more into the goth and punk maybe because she was, but I did enjoy kind of like, she would take me
Where
to.
are you from? Where were the
Well,
clubs?
I actually, so right now I'm actually in Cambridge, but I am originally from the Hartford area. And
Okay.
so in Hartford, like I remember and we're talking about when I was 16, 17 something years
What
old.
were the goth clubs in Boston?
Oh, I would never gone to one, but what I do, the worst thing that ever happened to me was she was very like new agey. So I remember her taking me to like paying $10 to go to people that would read like my past life and things like that. Like she was very much into this stuff, and she would hand me Fugazi tapes and things like that. And I remember writing the DK logo just to sort of impress her, but I didn't really. And I'd listen to some of the tapes, but
I would travel a lot when I was a teenager. I ended up, going on the road with bands and stuff like that a lot too. But sometimes I would just travel on my own to do things.
Mhm.
And when you're doing that, you come up with any way you can to make money, especially if you're like 17, 18 years old. So I would do tarot card readings, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I would
Right.
I was just really good at telling people things and they didn't know.
It's
So
exactly like role playing, though, and isn't
Yeah.
that the
it
whole
is.
point? The
It
players
is.
don't know if you fudged a roll or made up a card or made.
They don't know what the hanged man means. If I decide it means something, yeah, I would just kind of go with I was better at reading the person, and I would kind of think, what does this person actually need to hear? And
Right.
I would say that, and I would try to do them right. I'd try to actually think about something they could benefit from hearing, but I had no idea. I just, I didn't know.
Hey, Jason, they were paying for entertainment. You gave them entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They wanted the weirdo with the big mohawk and the tattoos to talk to them for half an hour. So
Right.
that's what they really paid for.
Right. James, when you were drawing, were you like drawing like creepy, scary stuff? Were you drawing punk stuff? What sort of stuff were you drawing?
A mixture of a lot of things, actually. A lot of it was fantasy based, so I draw my D&D characters, I draw monsters that I would think up, I draw dungeon maps. But then I also kind of was weird into I don't know, like mythology. So I'd end
Right.
up drawing like demons. And actually the funny thing is the more demons I drew was because of when the born again Christian kids would come and pick on me, I would just be like, I'll fix them. And then I just draw more demons. And it was almost kind of this uphill battle. But I drew a little bit of everything. And of course, as Pete I was a big DK fan because I grew up in San Francisco, so I saw him live multiple times
Oh,
when I
wow.
was growing up.
Mm.
Um, I had the jean jacket that
Yeah.
had almost no real estate of denim because it
Yeah.
was patch after patch and
And
spikes
buttons
and
and like
yeah.
like push pin or baby
My
pins and
leather
things like
was
that.
like that, but for the back, I had a velvet painting of dogs playing pool.
Oh,
nice.
that's
Because
good.
I thought like putting punk patches on it wasn't very punk, because that's what every
Right.
punk did, and you can't do what punks do. So I was like velvet painting of
Yeah,
dogs
you
playing
can't
pool.
conform, man.
Yeah.
What
Nice.
were your
Nice.
parents like? I don't know about you. Like I every once in a while my mother would look through like my notebook and she would find like some particularly grody like drawing or whatever that I'd done as well. And she would show some concern. But I think she sort of basically was kind of like my father and my mother kind of let me sort of go off and do my thing and they encouraged my creativity and I think they basically had like a feeling that I had like a good foundation. Were your parents concerned about this, or were you rebelling, or did they support this, or?
My parents loved it. They encouraged creativity. I never had a rebellious time against my parents, not once. Against my friends, all the time.
Oh,
But never. But I no, absolutely. I loved my parents. They were amazing, and they were really supportive.
Yeah, same with mine. My grandfather bought me my first box set when I was age 13. My mom upgraded me to AD&D 2 years later by just coming one Christmas with this amazing set of books and everything else she could find at the local hobby shop. And both of them, like even my drawings, my mom and dad were hippies,
yeah,
so they were a little less uptight about things. Not
right,
they're more spiritual than religious. So yeah, anything I wanted to do, play music, stand on one leg and hop, they would be completely like just supportive of that.
right,
Yeah, mine not so much. It wasn't hostile, but it was definitely not it was not welcomed.
yeah,
Like this weird D&D game that I played.
okay,
Like it wasn't like, oh my God, you're gonna turn into a serial killer, but it was just like, I don't understand this at all. And then like the whole punk phase I went through, that was like icing on the cake, right? And then at some point my 17th year of life, I don't think I talked to my folks for about 6 months, other than just, hey, bye,
right,
right? Like there was, we weren't mad at each other. We just had kind of just didn't see eye to eye.
right,
And it was like once that broke, once that silence broke, everything was cool. And they tell me to this day, they're like, it's like you actually opened our eyes up to the fact that if you see somebody who's whatever weird, it's like you'd bring these friends over of yours and some of them would be really weird looking or whatever
right.
and would normally freak us out, but like they were really nice people. They're like, it really opened our eyes up to see that you can't tell somebody just by looking at them. Like some of the nicest people you meet will look weird or whatever. So
What do you think? So you mentioned you didn't maybe talk to your parents just because I don't know if you're passing each other in the hallway of your
yeah,
house or whatever,
I
but
don't know. We just weren't seeing eye to eye, and it wasn't that we were really fighting. We just like kind of got to the point where we just didn't have anything to say to each other that
well, I was going to
wasn't
ask,
pleasant.
what got you through those 6 months then? Did you feel
Just
like were you doing other things? Were you busy
yeah. I always was hanging out
doing?
with my friends and stuff. I didn't care.
Right,
I was like, I'm busy being a teenager,
right.
like I don't know. Unlike Jason, I had a little bit of a rebellious stage where I was just like doing my own thing.
Yeah.
So,
So
but it was
then
all good. I mean, like I said, we didn't fight or anything. It just was what it was.
no, I kind of know what you mean. I mean, what's weird is I feel like if I look back on my youth, my teen years now, I feel in a way I was making a bigger. I was probably making more of an attempt to fight than my parents were attempting to fight. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Well,
I
it
think
does.
that makes a
It
lot of
does. It
sense.
makes a lot of sense, dude. I'm a parent now, so
right.
I'm getting payback.
Yeah. That's what my mother had always said. That's why I'm actually a teacher, right? So my mother just sort of like just shakes her head and she's like,
Yeah.
"Yes, you can go ahead and keep complaining, Matthew.
Yeah.
I did that for 18 years with you, young fellow, but all right."
But I think it helps. I think it helps because I can look back and go, you know what, she's going to be fine. I was probably pretty scary to look at from a parent's point of view
Right.
at times.
what were some of your influences at that time? So of course we've mentioned punk music and maybe the fantasy stuff, but were there other things going on, or other things maybe through your life, like since then, that you feel have sort of steered you in a certain direction, or colored or informed, like the way you look at design or the life, or
Jason, why
any?
don't you go first this time?
Oh, okay. I thought he was asking you. You know, it's funny. I absolutely lived in libraries from the moment I was old enough to get a card, right? So even when I was like in grade school, I would read all the mythology I could, and every book I could get my hand on, because I was reading at a real early age. You know, I think if you tell a kid that they can do something, they just will. So my parents decided to see if I could read when I was 2, and I was like, yeah, why not? And I was so bitch meant that I was grabbing everything I could. So a lot of it for me was reading histories, biographies, mythology. I just loved all that stuff.
Mm,
And before I got into D&D, I was the world's biggest Iron Maiden fan for an 11-year-old, you know? And so it's like you have all that stuff. You got Iron Maiden, you got mythology books, and then a game comes out like D&D, or not comes out, but you discover it, and it's a perfect fit, right?
right. And what's interesting though about that is that you guys keep mentioning, even though you're mentioning like punk or metal or whatever, I mean Iron Maiden is classical, like everything that they do is sort of based on some old legend or some old
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
story, or there
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
Yeah.
operatic like storytelling. Each song is 45 minutes long, and like
Yeah.
it's
yeah.
amazing.
It was
Yeah,
a
they're the definition of epic.
it was
Yeah.
a time. It was a kind of a time in history. There was this whole like in the early '80s, late '70s, early '80s. There was this whole like fantasy awakening, right? So like the whole fantasy thing. You had D&D that was like just taking off. And one of my influences, other than gaming and like doing artwork and stuff and just being a knucklehead, was I got into weightlifting. I loved weightlifting. Like one of my older cousins used to lift weights all the time, and because back then it was just like muscle and fitness, and everybody's like, oh yeah, right. So I got into it, and then I really liked it, and I started lifting weights when I was like 11 years old, right? And then and Conan came out, and Arnold
Oh
Schwarzenegger
yeah.
was the
Yeah.
man, and I just like I wanted to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. I wanted to be Conan, right? So I wasn't just like a nerd who liked Conan. I was like, I'm going to be big and strong like Conan. So I lifted
Right.
a whole bunch of weights, and it's something I carried to this day. Like it's the only exercise I even like doing is lifting weights. Like I don't
That's
like running. I don't like the only
right.
thing I like to do exercise wise is lift weights, and I actually love that. So if I'm having a bad day, I'll go hit the gym, and I feel so much better afterwards.
Right. Yeah, there is this sense of relief that kind of washes over you at the end of that, like when you finish like an hour, hour and a half or whatever, and you just feel like kind of exhausted, but at the same time you
Mhm.
feel fresh, like you're ready to
Right.
go out and kind of attack the
Or you
world.
you
And
feel like you've done something.
Yes.
yes.
That's why I like lifting weights better than doing running or something, because running, I'm like, great, I went in a circle.
Right.
Lifting weights, I
Full
feel like you've actually done something.
full disclosure, I lifted weights for quite a while, and then about 3 or 4 years ago, I sort of lapsed, and for the last 3 or 4 years, I've just been running, but not in
Yeah.
Oh, you're
circles along
crazy.
rivers. So,
Crazy. That stuff's hard.
I don't
yeah.
like running.
Running's too hard.
I hate running.
Um, well, how about you guys had mentioned that you were kind of starting playing, I think, around this time. Were you starting as players, or were you game masters? So maybe James, how about you? What were
Yeah.
you when you became involved with D&D and RPGs in general? What were you?
So I was a player for the most part in the beginning,
Mhm.
mostly because I couldn't understand the game. So I
Yes,
definitely had
yes,
had to
I
have some
get it.
friends run me through adventures, but I also can kind of be a control freak and suddenly found myself on the other side of the screen. And that's pretty much why I've stayed since like 1984.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm definitely more of a game master, but I did start as a player.
What do you think like sort of inspired you to make the switch? Because I'm kind of like you. I remember I still have a tough time with numbers, which is one of the reasons I think I mentioned I play Cipher System a lot. But there was a game, Robotech, the RPG from
Oh yeah,
Palladium
remember
came
it?
out, and I
Oh
was
Palladium?
yeah.
such
Yeah.
a Robotech fan. There was the first RPG I read from like cover to cover, and I was determined. Like I took notes on it, I highlighted stuff. What motivated you to switch and move behind the screen?
It's going to sound a little egotistical, but when playing games with others and having other game masters. Now, granted, I learned a lot of stuff from game masters over the years, but in the beginning, I kind of felt like Jan, your stories are boring. I could do
Yeah.
so much better than you. I'm more imaginative. And, so again, ego thing. And then I jumped on the other side and pretty much captivated most of the people who were in the group, including the old GM. And they actually remained in my gaming group for probably about 10 years, I would say.
Nice. And it also
Is that
oh, go
is
ahead.
that Michael and what's his name that I met at GaryCon that year?
They're part of like that group phase 2. They're
Okay.
not part of the original core, but
Right.
The interesting thing that says though about you, so I think as a game master, part of being, in my opinion, part of being a good game master is sort of making sure that the players still feel like they're the star. Even though you may have that feeling like, I want to be in control, I want to make sure that I do this, this, and that, and the other thing. If the players if they remain with you and they stay with you, particularly a game master who makes the switch and goes and downgrades from GM to player, if they stay with you, then that really says something about who you are as a GM. What do you think you were doing that caused the other players to want to keep you?
I think it's because I'm really more of a storyteller than a tactical gamer.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't like just going, you're walking through a forest. I kind of get Tolkien-y and probably write 4 pages on what the forest looks like around them. I love agency too. Like character agency is another big piece of it, which I know it's really big in games now.
Yeah.
But back then I was very big on,
True.
you're a player, but I'm not going to railroad you. Tell me what you're doing, and I'm basically going to create a story around you.
Right. What do you guys think? So Jayson and Peter, how about yourselves? Are you primarily GMs, players, or what do you
Well,
think?
I was trying to find, I guess I didn't have it right here next to me, but somewhere around here, I've got some of my maps that I did when I was like 12.
Oh,
Because
wow.
they're sitting in one of these things. I was going to pull one out. But yeah, when we started playing, and I think this is something for anyone around our age, I feel like everybody started playing around between the ages like 10 and 13 or 14.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still like that for players now. I hope it is. I hope that's the age when people get into it. But in our group, basically, I was the DM because I was the only one that was willing to do it.
Oh.
And so, and just like James, I had no idea how to run the game or how to play the game. So I had the red box and I had the DM's guide, which don't go together. And I made them go together because I had no idea. And we just, did whatever. And I can't remember for sure, but I think I might not have realized that Top Secret was supposed to be a completely different game.
Right, you thought it was an expansion to D&D.
Because I was doing the whole, like, now you're time traveling into the spy world,
right.
And I'm like, I don't know why these rules don't go with those rules, but whatever, So I don't think we played the game. Yeah, we had no idea how to play the game. We were more in the storytelling thing just by default because we were getting all the rules wrong. But who cared,
Goblin, James Goblin.
Peter, were you player or GM?
All right, so I started. So when I was
DM,
I was living
maybe I should say.
I was living in Florida when I found out about Dungeons and Dragons. So it was like 1978. My brother came home from college, but then I moved up to Baltimore, and I hadn't actually seen the game yet because he didn't come home with the game. He just came home telling me about it, and I remembered it in the back of my head. And I was walking past the library on my way to school, like about a year and a half later, and they had a sign in the window said, Dungeons and Dragons Club on Saturdays. So I was like, oh, I remember him talking about that. So I showed up at the library on Saturday morning and sat down with these group of folks and played. So I did that for about 6 months or so, but I was so much younger than everybody else. They used to always I got killed left and right. They used to, I'm the kid in the room. So I would always kind of get picked on a little bit here and there. And so eventually I got tired of that role. And I got some of the books and I got my friends involved. So I got my friends to play. And I had the game master. I had to be the DM because they didn't know anything about all this. So I introduced all my inner circle friends, except for one, I introduced to the game. And then shortly thereafter, there was a couple other people who said, well, I'd like to run some games. And that was it. And I was a player most of the time. So since then, I mean, I've run games and stuff, but I'm more of a player than a game master.
I think that's super fascinating because what I've found, like in at least the limited amount of sample that I've taken, like a lot of like designers and writers and whatnot, they sort of have this feeling like they want to take control. What do you think it is about you? Well, let me ask you this. Do you think as a player you have that control? Do you feel like you're giving up control? What do you think makes you a player over a GM?
Well, I'm so unlike what James was saying, I'm very strategic. I like to think very strategically. I love solving the puzzles that the game master gives. So I
Yeah.
like being on the solving end of it rather than the
Yeah.
giving end of it. I like not knowing the answer and having to figure it out. I prefer to be in that role. And plus I'm a very busy person. I'm just always
Yeah.
so busy with stuff to create adventures. I, and I was always designing games too on the side. So like my friends, we'd be playing and I'm always like, I'm going to make this game. And of course, I guess I would game master all the games that I made, but we'd only play them, 4 or 5 times. And they'd be like, this is broken as hell. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Right.
But I did make one that was really awesome. We played it for almost a year. But at any rate, yeah, I like being a player. I enjoy that a lot.
What's and this is kind of out to all three of you. What do you think is a healthy dynamic? What is your healthy dynamic between the game master and the player? Because what's interesting to me is that you sort of like a few of you mentioned about being in certain gaming circles for 5, 10 something years. And one of the things I discovered when I sort of started taking this seriously and I started going to conventions was, oh yeah, there are a lot of different player types out there. I would go to conventions and my approach or style, which, just my players who I've played with for decades now and maybe other friends, it fits perfectly, but this style that I take to the convention doesn't work. It falls apart
Right.
for different players. Yeah. And it was like one of my first experiences learning, oh, there are people that just like to kill things. They don't like
Yeah.
flowery language. They don't like to be agency. They just want to see things and kill them. What is a healthy relationship for any of you between a GM and a player?
Well, I've put a lot of thought into this because we still game every week. So since I was 10 years old, I've had a gaming group, and it's almost the same gaming group that I've gamed with, not every week, but nearly every week for like 40 years. And I think there has to be a level of trust between you and the other players and stuff that you'll keep the social contract of. When I'm playing this game, we have our roles and respect each other. And like, so for example, if the game master does something that isn't in the rules per se,
Yeah.
or makes a mistake and forgets, oh yeah, I did this other thing. All right, we're just going to retcon that. Right. And everybody just goes, yeah, okay, great. Cause it's not like, you're not going to hold that person accountable because it's a lot of stuff to keep track of and nobody's getting paid money to do it. We're having fun. The idea is that we're having fun. But I think the single most important thing is that nobody forgets the game master, the person running the game, is one of the players and they're having fun too. So don't make things difficult on them because, they're giving up their time making all this stuff. Right. And if they create this dungeon, like, oh, I watched someone tank his dungeon, that's a horrible move. Like you can do what you want to do, obviously. Right. And like, well, my character would actually do this, so I'm not going to do that, but it's nothing personal. It's not because of you. It's because this is really what my character would do. Right. That's fine. But like, I've seen people get adversarial with game masters. I'm just kind of like, there's no need for that. That's ridiculous.
James or Jason, any idea?
I'll go next. So a lot of, especially with the younger gamers, and this has been a lot in social media and just kind of online, where they're talking a lot now about a session zero. So basically this, where people get together and talk about what, all this, their safe spaces within the game, what we don't talk about, what we talk about, what we put behind veils. And oddly enough, I've done that naturally since the beginning. Like there's always that pre-game game where we create characters, we ask each other what we want to play, what do we want to see out of the game, what we don't want to see. So I think that's an important piece too, that social contract, that you can come together, talk about it, play. I mean, like I said, it's kind of the session zero thing. I think the session zero thing should come naturally. And I'm surprised that people are like going, oh, this is something you absolutely have to do. And I'm like, I've been doing this for God knows how long.
Yeah, I know we didn't learn. I mean, the idea of a session zero makes sense now, but it was a long time that I was gaming before I ever heard of the idea and it made sense. And of course, yeah, now. But it's a really big different dynamic, Matt, like you're saying, between playing with your group of friends where you already know each other. You know where your boundaries are, you know what you're good at, that kind of thing. Whereas playing in a convention, you need to quickly have that moment of saying, how's everybody going to have fun?
Right.
And that goes on both sides of it, right? So on the DM side or on the GM side, the way I usually think about it is if I'm inviting a bunch of people over to my house for dinner, I'm going to ask them what they like to eat.
Yeah.
So if I'm inviting a bunch of people to play a game with me, I'm going to ask them what they like to, what makes them have fun. Are you allergic to shellfish, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you need me to not mention anything about falling off of a cliff or something because you fell off a cliff when you were 8 and you can't get over it, whatever it might be, right? But then the other side of it is trying to figure out where people feel like in terms of how loose or tight they want to be with the rules. And that's where you are on the player's side. I've definitely violated the social contract when I was younger of, coming in as a player and trying to tell the game master, how a rule should actually be run. And I cringe when I look back at that I did that, because what a jerk. He's the game master. He's, they're trying to let you have a good time. So it's on both sides. Each side of the table has certain things they need to do to respect the other, like both James and Peter said.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that sometimes there's this pushback against this idea, not necessarily of doing a session zero, but of just sort of basically having an idea of what people want to do. And it sort of reminds me, like, and I guess the example that I often use is like you wouldn't just say, "Hey guys, let's go to a movie," and then you as like one person take everyone to a movie that you choose and just drop them
you don't even
in
know
the
what they
seats
like.
and say, "Let's watch it." You discuss it for you are actually, if you're like me and my friends, you argue about it for about a week before you go, and then you finally compromise on something. And so it just seems like, I get the idea of the concrete idea of the session zero in which you sit down and formally kind of talk about it as maybe being a little bit new, but the idea of discussing this before you kind of launch your game, what might be a campaign or whatever, just seems like kind of a no-brainer.
What I think it is that for some people who GM, they don't see it as inviting their friends out to let's all pick a movie. They see it as I wrote a movie and you're going to watch my movie. Mm-hmm. And they get really offended if anybody doesn't want to see the movie they wrote.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. A lot of people who gravitate to our hobby, a lot of us have got one type of social ineptitude or another, right? And especially if you are like that, it can be really easy to over-index on the I made this, shut up. And that's just, we have to learn how to speak to each other in a way that's like, yeah, I know you made that, but I really did not want to see tentacle horror today.
Right.
So
yes.
That's cool that you wrote that movie, but we didn't come for that movie.
Yeah, I feel. Oh, go ahead, please.
I was gonna say when it comes to conventions and stuff, I think it behooves you to write a good introduction to what you're going to be running. Make sure that it is clear.
Yeah.
So when people sign up, there's not like this surprise. Like you wouldn't say it's a mystery about blah, blah, blah. And then people show up and it's, hentai tentacle monsters and stuff.
Right.
Like, come on, that's not a mystery.
Yes.
I mean, you could have put that should have been in the description.
Yeah.
Right. Why am I showing up to this? Like, that's kind of like a bait and switch in a way.
Yes.
But like if I have an adventure about where it's going to be a World War II adventure and we're going to kill Nazis, right? I mean, you pretty much know what we're doing.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty simple. It's gonna be hard for me to pull something out of a bag that's bizarre, that's like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I mean, I could, but
well, I mean, you would tell people whether it's going to be more like Inglourious Bastards or more like The Bridge Too Far.
Yeah, sure.
Which flavor is it going to be?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So then tell me, so you guys are all kind of doing your thing and you're playing games here, but I assume that at a certain point you sort of, and I guess as maybe game masters, we're always kind of creating our own stuff. But there's a certain point where you walk across a line and you sort of decide, you know what, I'm going to see if I can sell this, or I'm going to see if other people, besides my immediate game group, kind of want to want to buy this, or even just want to take it from me for free, like just so I can feel like somebody else is using my stuff. Was there a different point for each of you, or did you guys I don't even know your backgrounds. Did you
really
guys
got to
bump
throw
into?
we really got to throw this to James first, because I
Oh,
think
please.
James is the most prolific and first of going out like that of the three of us.
So for me, and we're talking about when I decided to actually start making and publishing games, it goes back to the early 90s. So I for about 6 years, I ran a 1930s, 1940s pulp adventure sort of game. It went through many systems, top secret SI. I used the Agent 13 source book.
Cool.
I ended up using GURPS,
Yeah.
pulp, and a bunch of other things. And then ultimately I said, you know what? I don't like any of these rules. It's not playing the game the way I wanted to play it. And I had made tons of drafts. A friend of mine we kept going through drafts and created a system for it. And it wasn't until 1996 I ended up meeting game designer Jared Sorensen. Now, the name's not familiar to a lot of people, but he's one of like the big people in the old indie Forge scene. And he took it, helped me streamline it a bit, and he put it up on his website, which was the beginning of what would become Memento Mori Games. And people loved it. And I just ended up like going to cons out in California and running that particular game. But we didn't sell it, but that was kind of the point where I said, wow, I wanted to put my own stuff out there. Obviously, I freelanced after that with other companies before I ended up actually publishing my first book, but that was the line.
I was trying to find a copy of Pulp Era that I have sitting out in the dining room for right now. I've got more of your stuff here I can pull up when you mention it, though.
All right.
What did it feel like to cross that line then? What like did you feel like, oh God, I want to keep doing this, or was there some sort of pressure, or?
There's a little bit of pressure, only for the fact that I knew some, well, at least Bay Area gaming personalities. Like I was friends with Greg Stafford from Chaosium, the late Greg Stafford. I was friends with a bunch of indie designers who created a game called Theatrics that only like it was very, I don't know, it went to the used shelf very quickly, but it was a good attempt. And other people. So honestly, huh? Oh
Leo
yeah,
Normington.
Leo Normington, who actually we're kind of doing business with these days. But one of the even George McDonald. I don't want to sound like name calling, but the guy who
No,
wrote
but
the
it's
original
cool. People can go
Champions.
look up these
Yeah,
names and buy some of their
absolutely.
stuff.
Please name drop as much as you want. Yeah.
But these were people that I was like, oh, because social media wasn't a thing. So
Yeah.
I actually had game designers who were already veterans in the field that would look at my work, and that was really scary.
Mm-hmm.
But I got over it, I got a lot of good I got a lot of pointers, and things evolved obviously from that one little 2-pager that was on the internet for.
Was there ever a point, because sometimes I hear, like, I can't remember, I hear this from quite a few creators, and I don't know, James, if, because you mentioned this earlier, was there ever a point where you picked something up and you said, I can do better than this, and like you felt like that ego that you had mentioned when you were GMing before, did a switch ever flip and you kind of said, you know what, I should be doing stuff like this, or were you kind of?
Actually back to Pulp Era, where I was, so like I said, I ran it first in Top Secret SI. When I went to GURPS was like the I hate you so much that I would rather throw cans on the floor and see which way they land to play a game than play your game. So so that's what pushed me to go.
GURPS.
I'm sorry.
Me too. Steve Jackson coming on next week. Steve, please forgive us.
Would it help if I said early 3rd edition?
Yeah, it's
you can have opinions.
Yes, of course. Everybody knows that. Yeah, everybody.
Look, there's almost no such thing as a bad game, right? It's just what you like.
Yeah.
Oh, I got
like a game, you like it. If you don't, you don't. There are some bad games. I'm not saying none, but there's almost no such thing as a bad game. I think Fatal's
don't have
a
a copy
game.
of Cyber Commando, huh?
Oh, okay. Or Phoenix Command, right?
When was it that you fellas kind of gelled together? Did you get together like from a business relationship first? Were you guys friends first?
I think that's James again, isn't it?
Well, James and Peter knew each other already, but
okay.
So basically, James kind of got me into all of this because I had just gotten back into gaming. And when I got back into gaming around, I don't know what year that would have been, like 2009 or 10 or something, I started a podcast called Roll for Initiative, which was the first edition AD&D podcast.
Yeah.
And that did pretty well. I guess it kind of, because we're all centered around Dragon's Foot and stuff. And so James invited me to come and do some stuff at one of his conventions. First time I went over to James's house and I saw like the size of his collection, I'm like, I need more games.
Right.
It was Tavis Allison. He also had, like, him and James, the two of them had such big collections. And I'm like, okay, I need to buy all these games and get into all this stuff.
Right.
You had collection envy.
Oh,
Right.
it totally was collection envy.
We
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so then doing that led to, well, I know you want to save the TSR stuff for later, but it led to registering the TSR trademark and starting Gygax Magazine. And then Peter came to the first Gygax Magazine release party at the Brooklyn Strategist, because Peter was doing all the video and media and stuff. And so that's when I met Peter, and the three of us just kind of basically, I think at that point we did all hit it off.
Right.
Yeah, I was doing the Mythwitch show. That was very early on. I was like first season, I think, even. So I was like, let's do a video of this. Let's go do this thing. And so we drove up to New York and we went to the game. It was a cool little game store.
It was weird. It was so packed. It was really
was
kind
it,
of.
Wait a minute, was it a game store or was it?
Yeah, it's called the Brooklyn Strategist.
Okay, all right.
And it's over in like Park Slope.
I couldn't even tell because there were so many people there. I didn't even know what kind of place it was. I think they had food there. Right?
I was so fooled because it was my first time doing like a gaming event, and it reminded me of the stuff I'd been doing with music, where you would actually draw big crowds. And I'm like, oh, I guess every time you do a gaming event, there's a crowd that's around the block and they can't get in. That's just how it always works.
And you know what's crazy? Stephen Perconi was there, right? And he was running his Dwarven Forge. He had his chainmail koi form and everything. And I hadn't met him yet. I didn't even know
What year was this? 2009?
2013.
Yeah, 12 or 13.
Okay.
It was before he ran his first Kickstarter and really like took off.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't know who he was.
Stefan was doing some pretty cool stuff at that point already. But yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, he was a good friend, in the scene back then. But you're right. He didn't get quite as big with the stuff.
Well, Jason, I had no idea who he was. So I'm like, who's this weirdo with the chainmail thing on?
Oh, yeah. You want to talk about a good GM though. Yeah. Stefano's amazing.
No, I love Stefan. He's awesome. I would then later on become friends with him and hang out with him at conventions and, get rowdy.
I never tell stories about hanging out with Stefano in public because I can't tell them.
Especially not when they're being recorded, huh?
Right.
How did James, how did you and Peter get to know each other then? So you guys kind of came in and then you bumped into Jayson at this event. How did you both know each other?
Honestly, a lot of my gaming career focuses around a convention out of New York called Icon Science Fiction.
Yeah.
So I went to go to visit the con in 2001 and I didn't like it. I spoke to the leader of gaming at the time and I said, yeah, your convention kind of sucks. The gaming was horrible.
That ego again.
And they pulled me in and said, all right, well then you do something, and gave me a spot. I eventually later became the director of gaming for that con, but that's another story. But early on, I ran demo games, which was this little part of gaming that I would bring people in to demonstrate their games. And we had different companies and I was able to get funding from, outside companies, which was really cool. But on the forums, there was a game called Fusion that was done by R. Talsorian. It powered a lot of their games. And Peter and our friend Jay were like really, really, I can't even think of the word, but they were really into it.
Yeah.
And they were doing some cool stuff. Jay Libby had his own thing going on with a game company. So I invited them out to New York as guests. And that's really where it started. I still have pictures that first we're sitting in a classroom or something in a chalkboard and we're all standing together. But
and what, Jess Hartley's there and Aaron
Rosenberg
was there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was in 2003, I believe it was.
So I brought my first wife to that one.
And my first
The
wife.
first wife. Okay.
The first wife. Yeah.
If you want to know where we are on the Peter Bryant timeline right now,
Right.
we're
It's
at the
first
first wife.
timeline.
This is
Right.
post first wife, pre
All right.
second
So
wife.
I brought her to the convention, which might be why it's first wife.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
But
Um,
quickly moving up, Pete,
Mhm.
Pete and I and Jay became friends. Pete actually did layout for me on my
Oh.
first edition of Pulp Era, and
Okay.
just going to the convention with Jason as well. I used to listen to Jason's podcast. I didn't know who he was, and then I
Oh,
found out they
okay.
were in New York,
Mhm.
and I'm like, because I had a special event where Frank Menser,
Yep.
the writer of Redbox,
Mhm.
was going to be running a game there, special game with like
Yeah,
VIP
that
guests.
was the first time I met Frank, and that actually kind of led indirectly to doing TSR.
Yep. And I had Jason in that and a bunch of other people who were popular at the time. And after that,
Aaron
and
was there
honestly,
too, wasn't he?
what's that?
Aaron? I think
Yeah,
Aaron was
Aaron
playing in that game.
Rosenberg. Yep. George Straighton.
Oh
Cam
gosh, that's
Banks.
right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But the one thing
Forgot
I'll
about
say
George.
about Jason is that one of the things that really impressed me is as I walk in to meet him, I never met Jason before. I just heard his voice.
Yeah.
Here's this guy with kind of a pompadour, tattoos, leather jacket. And I'm going, I just want to be this guy's friend. Like he's
He was cool.
Yeah.
Once I was cool.
Did you
Back in
did
the
you
day.
really, when you walked into the room, you just heard his voice first? Was it just that? Was he?
No, I had heard his voice just on the podcast. So I've never
Okay.
really met him. And then
Yeah.
when I went into the room and to meet him in
Yeah.
person, I just saw that person in a leather jacket. And I'm going, this guy's just cool.
Well,
Right.
we're from the same scenes. We didn't know it. We actually hung out at the same clubs in San Francisco at the same time. We just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Because we both
Oh.
went to like Death Guild and Winter Gone By and,
Right.
you know, House of Usher and all those.
Well, and here's the crazy thing. Now, here's crazy. So Jason lived in Baltimore for a while, and I guarantee you, you and I were at same clubs. That
Oh,
we never
yeah.
ran into each other.
We know we were at the same ministry show.
Yeah, we were at the
Because
same
we're-
ministry show.
we're the
Yeah.
same ministry
Oh
show.
my
We
God.
both, you know, used to go to play school in the Hippo and
Yep.
all the shop at Reptilian Records. Yeah, same
Yep.
stuff.
So
Hearing you guys
he and I
talk,
we were in a lot of the same circles, but we never met each other back then.
Yeah.
it's really weird hearing you guys talk about music. I just feel like I'm back in high school again. Like it's just it's so.
Well, we're all
like,
music lovers.
I feel like it's
Yeah,
gonna be.
yeah. I mean,
Someone's gonna
I've
mention
never-
Skinny Puppy and like,
Yes!
I don't know.
I should have worn
what's
my
coming up
Wax Track
next.
shirt. Damn it.
Yeah, I'm never gonna stop being, you know, crazy about all the new music that's coming out. You know, people say that it wasn't, you know, it was better when I was 16. No, it wasn't. It is better every year. There is
Yeah.
something newer and better coming out.
And what's
There's
interesting
so many
though,
bands right now that I'm freaking out about all the time.
the
you know?
musical connection of like the idea of releasing these 3 to 7 minute stories. I
Mhm.
mean, those
Yeah.
are like easily consumable stories with and like as far as like I'm concerned, like when you're storytelling, like one of the things you do is you go through like stages of satisfaction, like where you're kind of hooked in the beginning and then the mystery deepens halfway through it and then near the end you get some sort of release at the end. And music really, I mean, maybe I don't know about you guys, but like when I'm working on something, like when I'm prepping for a game, when I'm writing, when I'm checking papers, it could be any number of things. I'm listening to music and that drive, like
Oh yeah,
3
yeah,
to
yeah.
7
There's
minutes,
always a soundtrack.
keeps me
There's
going.
always a soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife makes fun of me because when I'm heavy into work right now, I'm a project manager and I do proposals and stuff like that. So when I'm working, I generally can't listen to something with lyrics
Right.
because it distracts me. I'm doing words, so I can't listen to words.
Well, see, that's why you need to listen to bands like Terrorizer and Napalm Death because you can't understand their words.
They just,
Well, this is what I do, and my wife makes fun of me, and I don't care. A lot of people make fun of me, but I'll put on DJ sets like on YouTube.
Yeah,
So there'll be like
yeah.
a DJ like
Mhm.
Maceo Plex or someone like that, and I'll just listen. So I'm sitting there typing away. It's like, while I'm working, and it helps me because I get in a rhythm, and I like to start like
Yeah.
banging away, and
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, it's
Oh yeah, if I was listening to one of my favorite songs where I really liked the story in the song, then I would focus on the song. You're right.
yeah, right.
do you guys, and this is maybe a very specific niche question, are you headphones listeners when you're working, or do you let it fill
I
the
can't.
room?
No,
I
it's got to
can't
be in
listen
the
to
room.
headphones when I work because I've got sort of like a weird hearing thing that it's very easy for it to distract me if I'm not, if putting on headphones can really like mess with me when I'm trying to work. So I actually just have to let it fill the room.
Yeah, me too. I let
Same
mine fill the
here.
room too. Yeah.
Really, like I'm the total opposite in this respect.
Well, I've
Like
got
I'm too easily distracted. Just
well, I actually
have to
have a
it here.
pair of those things you wear at the shooting range so that you
Yeah.
don't hear.
Yeah.
I've got a pair of those when I need to focus and I don't want to listen to music because it just blocks everything out.
Right.
I have a lot of techniques I have to use for focus because I've got ADHD, and so it's just like I've got to have tools because you learn
Yeah.
to have tools.
Right. I completely understand.
Unplug your router.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be good if it wasn't that I wasn't streaming the music.
Right. I know. No, I'm just saying.
For me, that's why. I mean, one of the styles of music I really like. I love noise. Especially like harsh wall, like Volmir and stuff, which is just because it just washes over you with this just kind of abrasive. It's like white noise, but it's also really offensive to other people, so they stay away so you can get your work done.
Right. Where so Jayson, you mentioned that you got the TSR I'm not sure
Trademark.
exactly trademark. Okay, that's what we call it. And then you started Gygax Magazine. This seems like a very long story. Is there a way you could
No, it's a short version.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a short version. I've told it enough times that I've figured out how to do the summary.
You've whittled it down.
Yeah. I mean, well, basically getting the TSR trademark was just sort of a lark, It's like I noticed I was doing the podcast and, you're thinking about TSR because you're all first edition AD&D all the time. So I looked up the trademark and discovered that it had been abandoned, and did all my research to find out all that. And so I just thought, let's see if I'm allowed to have the trademark. I'm just going to go hire a lawyer, spend, not that much money, and just see what happens. Had no plans for it whatsoever. Yeah. And I got it. And then I was like, well, what do I do with it? Like, this is dumb.
Now?
What am I going to do with this thing? So my very first thought was I cannot just go and, do something on my own and be like, oh, yay, TSR is back, because that would be really dishonest and just, not true. Right. And James can attest, we spent a lot of time kind of sitting around going, what do we do with this thing? What do we do with this thing? Do we want to make a game? Do we want to do this or that? And the first thing that kind of came to mind was, no, we don't want to make a game right away because there's plenty of good games, and trying to immediately come out with the name TSR and to try to compete with other people would not be received well, and it just would be weird.
Yeah.
And so the first person I talked to about it was Frank Mentzer, because I figured he is enough of an original TSR person that he would have a good perspective on it. And then he introduced me to Luke and Ernie Gygax. And, as we started talking about this, just thinking what to do, the idea came to me that if you want to do something like this, you want to be supporting the hobby and kind of rising all boats rather than competing with people.
Yeah.
And since I had made zines and magazines for so many years, it was just natural for me to think, why don't we do a magazine? I grew up loving Dragon Magazine.
Yeah.
Let's get Tim Kask, who started Dragon Magazine. Let's get this whole crew of people. Now we've got, we've got Luke and Ernie Gygax. We got Frank Mentzer, who's, really kind of just supporting us from the sidelines. We've got, Tim Kask, who started Dragon Magazine. Now we can call this thing Gygax Magazine because that'll be a good nod to the past without doing anything.
Yeah.
And the whole idea was just that we would do a company called TSR as sort of a tribute, an homage, just like a fun way to do it. We had to create a new logo because we didn't own the old one. That's, to this day, that old logo is owned by Wizards of the Coast.
Okay.
That's a copyrighted thing. And we, like I said, we didn't want to represent ourselves by like going, oh, we're going to use somebody else's legacy.
Right.
We wanted to make things that either people liked it or they didn't on their own.
Right.
I even went to Peter Atkinson at the beginning of this whole thing, and I asked him before we did it. I was like, what do you think of the idea? And he kind of agreed that, you don't want to go representing yourself as this other thing, do your own thing. So that's really what it was about. It was just having fun with the name as sort of a tribute to things, as a nod to what we were going to be doing. But then we did it, our own way.
And
I hope
so
that was short enough.
no, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I was just kind of curious about what you meant, and I don't know if that was a legal term that you used, but you said it had been abandoned. Does that mean
Yeah.
that like the trademark wasn't like re-registered or something, and it was?
Let me just do, I'll try to do like the elevator
Oh,
primer
okay,
on
sorry.
IP. No, it's good because I think this is a really, really complex area that most people misunderstand. I didn't understand it until I got into this and started working with lawyers. And so basically, there's three different types of IP, intellectual property, right? You've got patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Patents are what you do when you have designed something and you want to hold on to your invention, right? You can have a design patent or whatever, like, I've invented the light bulb. This is how you make a light bulb. If somebody else wants to make one, they have to pay me to do it. So that's a separate issue. Copyrights basically last for your lifetime. So if you write a book or you paint a painting or you make a film, and if you own the copyright, that means that you've created an original creative work and it lasts for your lifetime plus I think 80 or 90 years.
Right.
Um, and so that's the kind of thing, like the artwork for the old TSR logo, like when Darlene drew the man in the moon. That's a creative piece of work, and that's got a copyright that lasts for 90 years after, Darlene, which hopefully will be a long time because she's awesome and she should stick around forever. Trademark is totally different. The only reason a trademark exists is so that consumers don't get confused in the marketplace, so that there's only one Coca-Cola.
Right.
So, if there's two Coca-Cola sodas, you don't know which one's the real one, blah, blah, blah. And it also means that if somebody wanted to make a car called the Coca-Cola car, they could, because it's a drink and a car are two different things. And a trademark only basically lasts for as long as you're using it. If you, and just to make it a little bit more complicated, but
excellent.
whatever, there's common law trademark and there's actually registered trademark. If you ever look at a logo and you see a little TM at the end, that means they're just common law. They never registered it. They're not, in something.
Right.
They're just telling the world that when you buy this thing, I've put a TM on it, just letting people know that, no, I mean this. This is my thing.
Yeah.
When you go and you register it with the office, then you get to put the R in a circle. That's a registered trademark. And the complicated thing is that if you do not register it, or if you let the registration lapse, as long as you're still using it in commerce, you still have the right, you still own that trademark by common law. So when I went and looked up the TSR trademark, the registration part had expired, but that wasn't the whole story.
Right.
Because if Wizards of the Coast had still been putting out products and saying this is a TSR product, even if they let it lapse, they would still own it. So what I then had to do is I had to go and look, how long has it been since they last put out a product that actually had the name on it? And it was, I don't know the legalities of how many years and that kind of stuff, but the point was they were no longer using it in the marketplace. The registration had lapsed for like a decade. And so we felt, okay, yeah, this is safe.
Cool. Well, thank you. Thanks. That clears up for me because the whole thing was very confusing and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But I appreciate the one-on-one explanation.
We had a bunch of people who were just like confused and they're like, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know, but I'm like confused." Like, and constantly was like, "No, don't be sorry. It is confusing. It's difficult." And we were just like, "Look, I'm sorry. This is confusing. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to clean it up."
Well, that's why I don't usually jump into like an online discussion about it, because there's so many people playing internet lawyer.
Yeah.
And I just find it's better to just let people have their conversations because it doesn't matter.
Well, I have to say, what's interesting about the three of you to me is what drew my attention, because when things kind of happened about a month or so ago,
the S show in Lake Geneva is what Tim Cass called it.
Yes. So when everything hit the fan,
we'll say that Tim called it the crap show in Lake Geneva.
Yeah. When everything hit the fan, what I noticed was your quiet, and when I say your, I mean the companies, the three of you collectively, your quiet yet kind of steady patience with the entire thing. And as a teacher, what I often see, and I'm sort of trained, and I've, for better or worse, I've sort of learned to look for this sort of thing. Like I see different approaches to solving problems and getting through things. And what impressed me was that. And I thought, my goodness, like I'm not hearing anything from them, but when you do hear occasionally a small thing or a small bit, it's a patient, steady kind of. It may be a quiet drum beat, but it's a steady drum beat, and I feel like you guys handled it very well.
Thank
But
you.
let me ask, not to sort of dwell on this, but I kind of want to hear a little bit more from maybe James and Peter about the way that you kind of came together and sort of, were you guys working on the magazine as well through all of this? Were you?
James was.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
I was kind of one of the, I guess, early
Founders.
adopters, yeah, founders of
Yeah. I
Gygax
mean,
Magazine.
mhm.
Um,
issue number one, you're all over this thing.
oh, that's true. So that's, yeah, that's, I mean, that was kind of my involvement with that. And then we haven't talked about the other stuff from TSR yet, but I was involved in a lot of
A
that stuff
lot,
along the
yes.
line. And it was a very hands-on deck sort of thing. I mean, even my wife Mary jumped in to do editing, and it was just kind of, we were a small group and we had so much to deal with. And also getting out there, talking to the artists, talking to the writers, collecting the material,
Yeah.
making sure it was edited. It was fun. It was crazy.
How did you? So James, what I noticed about and what I was super impressed was like from the very first issue, like you kind of had like a star-studded cast of participants, and it seemingly to me it's almost like it's coming from almost out of nowhere. And one person I want to mention who I used to love, you know, reading his cartoons, Phil Foglio,
Yeah.
who did work not just like for, he did work like in, I remember in this in Starlog magazine and stuff that I used to
Mhm.
love. Like how did you get like those talents
There
to
he is. This is
participate?
this is a What's New with Phil and Dixie that cannot be found online,
Oh my
can't be
gosh, that's
found in
so
any of his
cool.
books, only in Gygax Magazine.
How did you guys get their involvement? Like, how did it kind
Well,
of it?
Phil, I just basically went to a Comic Con and I just went over to his table. you know, he's a good guy, and he liked, we showed him what we were doing.
you
And
know
s-
and
mhm.
and for me it was more, and again, going back to the convention, I have met so many gamer designers in the conventions that if I wanted, now Jason managed to pull a lot of that talent in too, but a lot of it too is just me knowing people and networking and going, I want this person to write, and then writing and going, hey,
Well, you brought Alyssa on. That
yeah.
was genius. Alyssa Faden's like one of the coolest people there is, so that was great.
and
Yeah,
s-
and when all this was going on, at some point I jumped into the whole TSR ring. I was running the podcast network, so I had my show Mythwits, which became part of the TSR network. But then we started two new shows. We started Game School and Cube of Death. So Cube of Death was like a game show, and
right,
then Game School was this a podcast where we did interviews. So we'd interview game designers, and the goal was you'd interview them about the game, and then you'd play a short demo of the game that we just talked about.
right.
So there was that show, and then I brought in a couple more shows, and then I don't know, over the last, I want to say, year or so, it got to be too much because podcasting. I mean, you're finding out podcasting is a lot of work. It's a lot
Help me,
of work.
please.
Yeah, I was running 3 shows a week at one point.
What do you think it is though about what was it, Peter, that got why were you so much into that aspect of it? Because does this mean were you juggling this along with like the creative aspects at TSR and your full-time job and a relationship and
Okay, so yeah, relationship, young child,
yeah,
and podcasting. I really wasn't doing much creative work outside the podcast work. I didn't have any seconds left. I barely slept as it was.
yeah.
Because Cuba Death, I would actually write the episodes, and then we'd do the show. I'd have to schedule guests, and then I would edit all the episodes and then throw in music and sound effects and background stuff. And so I was doing that. And then I was also scheduling guests and running my show Mythwits, and then also scheduling guests, and we were doing game school. I barely slept. I remember I was at my daughter was ice skating. And so I took her to her ice skating lesson, and I was sitting there with a laptop writing up the last little bits of the Cube of Death episode we were about to do that night.
Right.
And then I would send it to James, and James like get a cold read because like, hey, I just finished this. The show starts in a half an hour.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And yeah, it got crazy. It was too much. And I actually about a year and a half ago, I burned out, and I'm like, I'm not doing any more podcasts. I'm done. I overdid myself. I burned myself clean out.
And
Maybe again. Maybe I'll pick it up again later.
at
But
some
I just,
point.
too much. Because I had another show 3 years before that. So I had been podcasting for 10 years,
Yeah.
and I was just done at that point.
Yeah,
I'm
and
like,
here I am about to drag you back in too.
maybe we'll see.
This is outside of the gaming world, but I'm also an independent producer for iHeartRadio, and so I'm trying to pull Peter into doing an iHeartRadio show.
Oh.
We'll see what happens.
Oh my goodness. That's like, that is a lot of stuff to
Well,
like,
that's
sort
well,
of
that's.
take
I mean,
on.
that has a really strong purpose, and there's backing behind it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be by myself. I'm not going to be doing it by
Yeah,
myself.
there's money.
It's
There's
a
money.
different. It's a
Well,
different
yeah.
dynamic. Yeah, it's a whole different thing.
So let me ask you guys this. Are you each holding down a full-time job on top of the
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is always very fascinating to me because I'm starting out sort of doing the same thing, but I just think there are a lot of other people out there that are kind of asking themselves the same question, and that's like, how do I hold down a full-time job and then sort of do this in the background and then have my family and relationship? How do you do it?
You develop rituals and habits, I think, is what it really comes down to. So you kind of stumble into them backwards, but for me, I have a number of very regimented things throughout the day. So I get up around 5 a.m. I try to take care of anything that happens before work, right? So I've got like a standing meeting with one of my because my thing is I got a full-time job.
Yeah.
I'm doing Solarian Games, and then I'm also a producer for iHeartRadio. So in the morning, I take care of all the admin stuff. At 8 a.m., I have a call with my partner over at iHeart. And then I start work at 9, stick with that till 5 or whatever. And now here we are kind of doing the after work podcast. I'll grab some dinner, and then I'll have a certain amount of things that I do during the evening, which are all based around Solarian and that kind of stuff. And take little breaks in between, usually go to bed around midnight, and then just kind of start over the next day. And you start building these parts of your day where you're like, this is this part, that's that part. You sacrifice a little bit of the sleep. But yeah, you have a number of things in there. I've got a lot of tools that I've kind of come up with in terms of the way that I plan my days, or like I have a shutdown ritual that I do, if you're familiar with doing those.
Yeah.
So
James, how about you? Do you have a particular approach to
It kind of follows the same as Jason's, really. Like I usually start work around 8:30 in the morning. I usually wrap up 4:30 to 5. And then like I'll have dinner, and then I set a office time or off, just basically go into my office, lock the door, and start working on what I need to work on. Obviously a lot of distractions, but I get there. One of the things too, and I think it's a great thing, and I think Jason has this and Peter as well, is like my wife is a gamer. She actually works on her own projects. She does stuff. So it's not like she's demanding my time, because she knows exactly what I'm doing and would do the same thing. So,
yeah, my wife and I work together on some of our projects too, which really helps, because then you get the double whammy of getting something done and having some together time.
Right.
Yeah. I don't have that. My wife is not into gaming at all. She supports my hobby.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not her thing. So yeah, I used to sleep almost 0 hours a night, 4 or 5 hours a night. But I've slowed down a little bit. I'm getting a little older, getting a little gray in the beard here. And I found that I really I need more sleep, or I can't concentrate properly.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a pretty stressful, demanding job, and I'm just like, I can't. I'll, you know, if I show up at work and I'm like half zoned out because I stayed up all night designing some game thing, it's not good for my work, and this can't jeopardize my work. That pays the bills.
Right.
So I've been trying to make sure I get no less than 6 hours of sleep a night. I shoot for 7. So I try to get at least 7 hours. I get up at 6. So if I'm in bed by 11, right, and I get up by 6 a.m., I'm usually pretty good. And I take care of all my stuff, and then I do work. And then after work, we have, you know, I'll have dinner because I work right up till dinner time. Then I do dinner, and then I usually spend about an hour or so with my wife. We spend some time together, watch some TV or whatever. And then she goes to bed a lot earlier than I do. She's usually in bed by like 9 o'clock. And then that's when I sit down and I work until about, you know, 11, maybe midnight if I'm really cranking away at stuff.
And that's on the Solarian stuff. Is that correct?
That's, well, it's whatever I'm working on. But yeah, generally Solana. Yeah.
I think recognizing what time of the day is best for what things, because we're all creative at different times of the day as humans, right? So you just kind of learn, you know, at this time of day, I'm better at writing. At this time of day, I'm too distracted for it, or whatever it might be. And then the other thing for me, like I mentioned, startup and shutdown rituals.
Yeah.
Because you need to create some boundaries in your day. That
Transitions,
says,
clear.
Exactly. Like, I've ended this thing. Now I'm at my day job, and I've got to be focused on that. Now the day job's over. I've got to be, I turn it off. You know, I don't check work emails after hours, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, me neither.
Peter, I was wondering, you sort of mentioned that about a year and a half or so ago, you were feeling a little bit burned out. Is there something that, like a game that you've produced, or maybe something you're working on now, or something that's come out in recently? Is there something that's exciting you, or maybe you can feel sort of drawing you out of that kind of?
Hell yeah, man. We're the whole Solarian thing, when this all happened, right? I mean, I was still kind of, you know, we were kind of chugging along on stuff. You know, we were making some stuff, but when this whole Solarian thing started really happening, you know, switching over from TSR to Solarian, I got totally re-energized. I don't know what it was about just this new thing, but now I'm excited about everything we're doing. So I'm just like, you know, I'm working on 2 books. I probably can't show it, can I, Jason? I got cards sitting here next to me.
Sure.
Well, you know what? I'll show. It's funny. I was printing my versions of these cards out. I won't show what it's called, but I will show you that I made mine much smaller than yours.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah.
Well, because I was doing them in color. I'll hide the name of the game, but I was doing them in color. So
I'll hide the name of the game, but there's something that looks like this in there.
Okay.
We're doing a breakfast themed game. We decided it would be fun to do something that was very family friendly, that you could sell it at Cracker Barrel. So we're having a blast just doing this completely different type of thing than we normally do.
Oh, I'm not kidding, man. I want to get this in Cracker Barrel. I think that's my goal.
I'm not making fun of anything here. I'm
know.
like, oh my God, I do feel like I'm back in high school. Cracker Barrel's where we used to like go, and it's just goofy.
Well, it's because they have that store there, right? They carry there's a store in the front.
Yeah. So I'm like, if we're gonna make a breakfast themed game, it might as well. But yeah, the thing is, we try to keep it fresh, you know, so that we're not getting too burned out on just doing one type of thing.
It's
interesting. And what's interesting is so Jason and I are always talking about breakfast food. He and I are
because we both love Scrapple.
Crazy into Scrapple. I don't know if you know what Scrapple is, but it's a I got to say Scrapple on a show, Jason.
Yeah.
What is Scrapple?
It's all right. So like it's a Delaware, Philly, Maryland kind of thing. It's that area. It's a breakfast meat. So it's
the American haggis.
Yeah, it's kind of like American haggis. So it's pork bits, and everybody says it's like the scraps and stuff. That's not true. It's actually good pork parts, but it's pork parts and cornmeal, and they make it into a loaf, right?
And fry the heck out of it.
You slice the loaf up and you fry it on both sides, make it nice and crisp, and you eat it. It's sort of like a liver mush kind of.
Yeah.
Really good.
It's good stuff.
But Jason and I talked about, we talk about breakfast and going to breakfast at places, and we love the same breakfast places in Baltimore. So,
well, this is a big thing. Whenever the 3 of us are at a convention together, just even in Lake Geneva, you know, we've got our standard breakfast place that we always go to. It's a big part of the day. So,
James,
did you ever go with us to TotalCon when we were at TotalCon? Did you ever go to us to the D&D diner? It was at the old place. Now it's not D&D as the game. It was like Dan
David
and Diane
Dolores.
or whatever. Right?
But were they aware of what they?
No, not at all. That's the beauty of it. It was just, there was the D&D diner at a convention. I'm like, we got to go eat here. And it was a great, like, greasy spoon. Like, so
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
Mike and I would always go.
in Robert Asprin's Myth Adventures, I remember when I was a kid, I read he was talking about they go into the Yellow Crescent Inn, and Oz the demon's like, the thing about a good diner is the cleaner it is, the worse the food.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
And I
Right.
read that story when I was like 13, and like since then I'm like, yeah, that's how you do it. Cleaner the diner, the worse the food.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there so James, I was actually going to ask you, is there a particular game or something that you've been working on recently, or maybe something you've done in the past that has kind of energized you or gets your kind of blood flowing?
Wow. That's it's a good question, and there's a lot of things. So obviously, I was the mechanics designer for Top Secret New World Order,
Hmm.
and the Lucky 13 system always get like, if anything, I will completely get lost in thought about how I can change the system, how I can make it work, and then suddenly I always get back to the reality of like, we got to do a 13. But
Right.
I've written up on Google Docs many variations of the game, so that gets me thinking. But the one game that's currently getting me really excited right now is I'm gonna do a second edition of a game that I wrote back in 2012 called Tales from the Fallen Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there it
Oh,
is.
cool.
Um,
Tell us about Tales from the Fallen Empire. I did see it on the website. I am not familiar with it though.
so Tales from the Fallen Empire kind of started as I don't know, almost fanfic, right? I was just a big fan of Conan and Elric stories and the Grey Mouser and all that. And and my thought was like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if they all existed in one sword and sorcery sort of world? And to top it off, I was a big fan of a really bad movie called The Sword and the Sorceress with David Carradine
Mm-hmm. Yep.
from the late 80s or mid 80s. And I was like, wow, I'd love to do a role playing game based on that. So I took all those elements, filed the serial numbers off, and
Mm.
just worked on it and created a setting. At this time, Dungeon Crawl Classics by Goodman Games was still in playtest.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Joe Goodman and I was like, look, I want to run. And actually, to this date, I think, well, no, there are now campaign settings for it. But at the time, it was the only campaign setting for DCC for probably the first 4 years of the game. It was modules and stuff, but never a
Yeah.
campaign setting.
Yeah.
And Joe said, go for it. I used that as the backbone,
Cool.
worked on it, hired artists. This is my first time hiring artists and trying to budget everything.
Right.
This is also where I met Alyssa Fadden,
Mm-hmm.
who did some beautiful maps for the setting. Michael Curtis, actually, it has some pretty good Chris Light. There's a lot of authors in there who are well known in the OSR community and such. But it's my pride and joy. It's my baby. It's
So
like
I'm curious then, because what's really interesting to me is you said something that I think happens to a lot of, just like about every GM out there, right? You said, oh, it starts out as maybe fanfic, but of course you have taken it from being what was maybe fanfic or maybe just the stuff that you're using, and you've polished it and turned it pro and released it. I mean, I know it's probably a long process. I know there are probably a million things to talk about, but how did you shape it from being fanfic, as you call it, to being professional? And in the process, you're sort of learning as you go by hiring artists for the first time, or looking at it maybe from an editor's standpoint or a layout and designer standpoint. How did you do that?
well, from the fanfic to the material of the book, that was mostly kind of like me trying to play God. I imagine this world and how this world, like how the world began and why these people are here and where they came from and back histories. And I took actual like Earth histories like Vikings and ancient China and things like that, and really started just kind of working their own cultures out of them. And ultimately, it just kind of fell into place. Um, I was really frightened during this Kickstarter because I had no idea what I was doing. I actually had a Kickstarter before that for a game called Spooky Beans, which completely
Yes,
flopped.
I saw that.
We published it, but
Yeah.
on our own. Um, but it was interesting because when this Kickstarter as was going, it brought interest, especially since the DCC community was really kind of just a lot of people in that were just drawn to it at the time. So like I got Doug Kovacs. I actually met Eric Quigley, who was actually a very expensive artist these days. And this was kind of one of his first tries at like doing cover art.
Yeah.
So I got an Eric Quigley piece, I think for like, I want to like under $300
Nice.
for a full
Okay.
color cover
Good
and
deal.
back and screens and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, Eric, now if I try to go, hey, would you do a cover for $300? He would probably shoot me, you know.
Right. How do you decide then? What's interesting is you mentioned how it was a complete failure, but then you decided to, as far as Kickstarter goes, but then you decided to publish it on your own. How do you guys make a decision as far as like what you're going to publish next or what you're going to do next? Is there a debate, or do you each get a turn, or?
Well, I'll put this to Jayson, I think, because Jason's
Yeah.
kind of a little bit more the Kickstarter mastermind than I am.
Well, I mean, the question of whether to kickstart something is not only about whether you need the money, but sometimes it's just a good way to get the word out and to find out how much demand there is for it. You know, should we do a really big blown out thing, or should we just do a little small thing with it? So as far as how we decide which thing we're going to work on next, it's pretty much just a consensus. Like, we know that Top Secret is our flagship and it's what we're all really energized by. And we've got so much stuff that's like just about to come out with it. There's like all these different things that, so right now, a lot about that is just saying, that's our flagship. We have stuff that's nearly done. Let's push it over the line and get that out. Other things, you know, maybe with the card game that we're doing, because it's relatively easy to do, and you know, so then maybe that gets a little bit of priority.
Right. And then we got the other card game, Jayson, and that has to be Kickstarted because it's a physical product, right? Yeah. And it's a big card game, so it's going to cost thousands of dollars to get that into people's hands. It can't be a PDF. It can't. It's not. There's no electronic version of this, so it has to go into production. So that's the kind of stuff that requires it. So if we put out like a game book, we don't have to do a Kickstarter for it. We could do
we could theoretically just do it print on demand. Yeah.
So I was just going to ask, so you're saying the maybe the larger projects, and when I say larger, I guess I mean the ones that involve like multiple like pieces, and they have like manipulatives and things like that, that would probably cost a lot of money to sort of back and then just send out to like stores to publish. You're looking first for for the investment and the interest on the part of the people that want to potentially play it. And that's something you might kickstart, whereas a book, which is relatively cheap and I guess simple because everybody...
Well, it's not cheap or simple, but the thing is that with the book, you always have the option of print on demand, which we don't like, because there's two problems with print on demand. One is the quality is lower, and two is there's no profit margin at all. You make $0 on print on demand. But you know, if you just want to get the product out there so that people can be playing it and enjoying it, then at least it's an option. Whereas with something like, you know, the Cube of Death game, which is the big card game and has a lot in it, you can only kickstart it. So the decision for whether to kickstart something a lot of times comes down to how, aside from, you know, does it have to be, is how close is it to finished? Because we won't kickstart something that's not done yet. You know, we've seen enough people say, I've got these grand plans for something, like I'm going to do this big thing, but they haven't done it yet. And so they kickstart thinking that that's, you know, going to get it. And then, you know, the next thing you know, it's 5 years later and it still hasn't come out. And everybody's, you know, even when it does come out, it's like, okay, you know, so we really want to be done with something before we will kickstart it.
Are you guys like pitching to each other? Do you come in one morning and you say, oh, I had this great idea last night? Or
I think we pretty much make something first and then we show each other what we're already working on.
Yeah, it tends to be how it works. It's like, hey, I'm working on a thing. Check this out.
Yeah, I already made it. Do you guys like it? Yes or no? Check yes.
Yeah.
Right. Is there anything?
Now,
oh, go ahead.
We've been, honestly, I don't think there's been no to anything. We've been very supportive. The three of us have a pretty clear mindset of the kind of things that we want to accomplish. There's an idea on strategy. I think we all see the same strategy. So I'm not going to pitch some crazy friggin' thing and say, well, I'm only going to work on this because that's what I want to work on. And it's just like, dude, it's going to take you 2 years to develop that. We've got all this other stuff. What are you doing? I haven't seen anywhere where we've done anything like that. We've been pretty conscious of each other's stuff, and I have stuff. I mean, I have a long plan of stuff I want to make. There is a long backlog of stuff I want to make,
Yeah.
but it's in that backlog right now, and its time will come. It's just
Mhm.
right now is not that time.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and I think each one of us has maybe smaller things as well that we're doing that are on the side. You know, we have side jobs to our side jobs. You know, like
Right.
James put together a great thing for Kickstarter's February zine quest called Anarchy. And that's where my boombox thing came out of too, although James is more finished than I am.
Yeah, but you're the one who actually. So
Well,
I
Tim
have
Hutchings told me to do it, and then I told you to do it, and then you got it done before I did.
so oddly going to Pete's gamer burnout. The pandemic really burnt me out. You know, just a lot of depression and just kind
Yeah.
of. I lost a lot of urgency to do anything and
Yeah.
kind of just gaming just kind of felt numb to it. And oddly enough, Jayson was talking about Zine Quest, and I was going, "Oh, what's that?" And as he started to describe it, my brain suddenly filled with old Maximum Rock and Roll magazine, and old punk magazines.
Mm.
And I'm going, wouldn't it be cool to do a quick role-playing game zine about punk rock culture and make it look like an old Maximum Rock and Roll
Right.
magazine? And I
Right.
got so excited that I, the manuscript's finished. It's actually in layout right now. Art's already been paid for and done. So I got so excited. I started hiring artists, going, all right, I'll be broke, but I have
Right.
artists to do stuff for me now. And honestly, it reinvigorated. That was like the kickstart I needed to really kind of want to get back into it. So I kind of thank Jayson for that, because other than that, if I never would have heard of it, that hearing the word zine, like
Yeah.
it just a spark went off.
Yeah.
And so this is the nice thing about doing Solarian, right? We didn't plan to change our name, obviously. Well, we did, we'd been thinking about it anyway. We'd been kind of in the back of our heads, but it was a surprise that like, oh, guess we're changing it now. But you should always look for the opportunity, right? Like if something goes crazy, there's got to be an opportunity in there. And the big thing for us is that now we're freed up a lot more to not worry about, would TSR do
Right.
this? Is this big enough? Is this, we can do experiments and we can do things that are kind of out of left field and just have fun with them.
Yeah. And for me, like I think it just, from only talking to you for like the last 90 minutes or so, I just sort of feel like you seem to me like the sort of folks that have like your kind of own idea or maybe your own legacy to kind of sort of
Yeah.
travel onward with. And to me, like I think it's the idea of, like, I'm trying to think in my head, like if I had been in this situation where I saw a trademark and I was like, oh, I could actually, this is something I loved when I was a kid and I have the opportunity to take it on and perhaps carry the torch or do something with it. What would I want to do? Would I want to take, and I probably would have this feeling like I want to take it, but if I'm sitting here being honest with myself, I would also think, well, I'm never going to recreate. I'm never going
Right.
to, and I'm never going to necessarily blaze my
And
own
nobody
path.
could, because
Yeah.
that's a different time.
It's different.
These are different people. That's a different time. And it became a little bit of a thing where it was fun at first to say like, oh, we're doing this, and I think a big part of it was both with Gygax Magazine and just calling it TSR was to maybe get people to look back at that other stuff and see how cool it had been.
Right.
But then when you start doing it for a number of years, and now people have expectations that they think you're going to do old school stuff.
Right.
And then they ask, do you consider yourself the old company? And we'd have to say, no, we don't consider ourselves the old company.
Right.
We don't want to get trapped in that. So
Right.
now, we've got a freedom to do things that, like you said, it's going to be our own legacy.
Yeah, it's interesting because it reminds me of, and I don't know if this is going to make a lot of sense here, but if I watch, and I'm not saying I don't like him or whatever, but if I watch like a Kevin Smith film,
Mhm.
I feel like I enjoy it, I laugh, I have fun, but I feel like I'm watching something built to celebrate some other sort of work, because he's always sort of making references
Well,
to
more
Star
recently,
Wars,
yeah.
making
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Yeah, maybe more recently. But then on the other hand, if you look at some of his other, like if you look at a film like Red State, which is totally out of left field or whatever that he's made, that has absolutely no connection to like anything he's done in the past, I feel like he's really making his mark. And so to me, I just sort of feel like the idea of you guys rebranding and sort of maybe not even rebranding, maybe just allowing your
Well,
real
it's that we
brand to
actually
show.
started a new company. We actually
Yeah,
Yeah.
started a new company.
yeah, you're like you're being yourselves. I sort of feel. I guess is what I'm
I
getting
hope
at.
so.
Um,
Yeah, I think there was, like Jason said, there was a sense of freedom that came with this,
mhm,
that we could do whatever. It's like, oh wow, we can do anything we want now. We can, whereas we could have before too, right? We could have,
mhm.
Sure.
but there was an expectation. It's like a baggage that comes with it. It's like it's TSR games, so that means this and this and this, and it means something different to every person who sees it, right?
Yeah,
And it's just kind of like, yeah, we're never going to be our own. We're never going to be our own child, as
right.
long as we're carrying our dad's name.
Yes.
So we
Well,
had to strike
the
out our
other
own.
thing I really like about it is that it's important to me that we are appealing to younger players.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I want to see people feel comfortable with their high school and junior high kids playing it, and I want and college age and everything else. And I think carrying that older name kind of didn't necessarily appeal to somebody who's 22.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't mean it would necessarily just they didn't know it, but then there's misinformation and misconceptions about maybe what it is. So I really am I was so happy with the way that everybody supported us as
Yeah.
we changed our name,
Yeah.
and to see kind of this influx of gamers that I've always followed these different gamers online.
Hmm.
I've played some of their stuff, but they didn't really feel like we were in the same scene before.
Right.
And I
Right.
feel a lot more connected to the gamers that I've liked anyway. So just because we've carved out our own space and we've kind of publicly made it clear that
Yeah.
we like all gamers and that we're not
Hmm.
a bunch of grognards that are just thumbing our nose at people because they didn't do what we did. It's like,
Hmm.
you're not having the same childhood I had.
Right.
Duh.
So for the most, I mean, it just sounds like you guys, in a way, you just feel like this is a breath of fresh air. You're able to sort of spread your wings and do your own thing. But I kind of wanted to sort of, I had heard in a few interviews with you, Jason, that you had mentioned that you are not a boss. And yet, a couple times tonight, I feel a little bit like maybe Peter or James have sort of said, well, maybe Jason has to answer that. Are you a boss? Are you not a boss? Are you guys equal in this as partners? Um,
I think I'm Tom Sawyer.
which means I know who he is.
I get everybody to come over and whitewash the fence with me.
Yes.
I can be a little bit of a ringleader and stuff, but when I say I'm not a boss, what I mean is like I'm not. I don't want to be the person that is telling everybody else like this is going to be the path. I want things to be collaborative and that it's a group effort, and this is a group effort.
Right. And so,
Yep.
can you guys tell me then, what do you each think you bring to Solarian Games? Like, what are you doing? So, as a teacher now, I'm going to ask you guys to sort of take off your modesty. Well, I know, James, you'll have no problems with your ego doing this, but take off your modesty caps. What do you bring to the what do you bring to the collective, and what are you doing right? What's the magic that you're bringing? No pressure
I,
at all.
I'll go first. I think I'm kind of the bulldog. So I kind of like push. And it's like, we got to get this done. We said we're going to do this. And you do this first. Jason's like, hey, I have this great idea for it. No, Jason, you can't do that. We said we're going to get this done. Right. And it's like, and yeah, I want to fly off the handle and do crazy stuff too. But I'm my primary job at work is I'm a team leader. I run a team of folks and I'm a project manager. I understand like my core of my being is cost, schedule, performance, right? Those three things, like those, I live by those three rules on a regular basis. So, um, so yeah, I can kind of be, I'm kind of like, hey, let's concentrate and get this stuff done. Um, I'm good at working with people. Like I'm a very people-y person. I like talking to people. Um, if Jason's like, hey, can you reach out to these people and take care of this? I'm like, yeah, sure, I got it. Right. go to a convention, right? I'll run big events at a convention, and I'm happy to like be out front and center running stuff. And I don't really get any anxiety about that at all. I'm just like, I don't get stage fright one bit. So I'm just like, I'm good, doing those sort of things. But I also I bring a design mind. I think, what do you think? I'm a pretty good designer, you guys. You think?
Yeah, you are. Yep.
Like mechanics, like making rules and like figuring out how things, like game mechanics stuff. I call myself a gaming gearhead. So I love to get into the numbers and crunch numbers and figure out probabilities. And like, I'll actually run the probabilities on a set of dice. Like, what is the probability of making this roll? And what is our median? And, cause I come from an engineering background. Right. So numbers, like, I'm like, well, it's going to be very hard for them to make this roll because the probability states that blah, blah, blah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because earlier on I had asked you why you felt like you were more of a player than a game master, but now I can, with what you just said, I can kind of see why you'd be a player, because you're trying to figure out like how that works and how to solve it and then how to get through it. James, what do you think you bring?
So to his bulldog, I'm kind of like the annoying magical gnome.
Okay.
So I'm more the dreamer.
Yeah.
I'm more the person, like an idea person. So I will shuffle through 10 ideas in and out. Like, there's been conversations with Jason and I in the early days where all we would do is just toss ideas back and forth, just really silly ones or whatever. Or if he was stuck on an idea, I would suddenly just sit there and be the cheerleader and gush about it and go, well, you can do this. And
yeah. Every time I have a problem with the mechanic, the first thing I do is call you.
And as where Pete is a little bit more gearheaded, I'm not. So my game mechanic design is more flowy. You can probably see that in Lucky 13, where it's not very tactical. It's just kind of like, I want to create a system where you roll a couple of dice, but you do everything based on that and that sort of thing. But there's also a downside to being a dreamer too, is that when you are a dreamer, you get lost in dream, which means that sometimes I have a project and we're like, all right, let's do this. And then suddenly I go off on this like weird mystical journey in my head. And then it's like 2 weeks pass and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I was supposed to do this thing. So I think that's the downfall of it. So
that's when he gets an email from me. Hey, James, where's that thing?
Yeah. So, but luckily I've been on track with things as of late. Anarchy is a good example of that. Wrote the manuscript, had it edited, art and layout. So I think that's why I contribute. So bulldog and dreamer. Magical gnome.
And then what's Jason's analogy?
Yeah, oh gosh, what animal am I going to be?
I know. What animal?
Can I be the kangaroo?
Yeah.
Bounce around. I bounce around and I kick everybody.
Carry things in your pocket.
Yeah, no. So I guess I'm, the person that likes to kind of whip everybody up. I'm the one that kind of brings everybody together. You mentioned, I was just looking at the masthead from the first Gygax magazine. I'm like, yeah, we did have some good names in here. The fact that
you do.
I mean, we got like Cory Doctorow.
Yeah, I know.
Bard, people like that. Because I love people, and so I'm always, trying to meet new people and get to know them and everything. And so it means that I can usually find a good group of people to get together, when it's time to. So if we're the A team, I guess I'm George Papard in that sense, right?
James, Jay, I was going to say you're kind of like the muse of the group. You give us the purpose to the ring, like you said, the ringleader. Like you're just like, hey, let's do the thing, and we're gonna do a thing.
But then the other thing is that what I think people maybe don't see so much is that then it also means that I'm doing all of the kind of work behind the scenes to make it happen. So
he does do a lot.
Everything from like setting up bank accounts and working with the IRS and dealing with the lawyers and when we getting our warehouses set up, and when somebody orders something from us, if some of it comes out of the warehouse, like if you order top secret box set, we have actual professional warehouse, but there's a lot of stuff that ships here from my house. So every day I'm the guy doing the shipping, and stuff like that. So it's kind of a combination of being the person who brings everybody together to figure out what we're going to be doing, but also picks up a lot of the the day-to-day things as well.
A lot of the admin stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're trying to share that.
Well, that's one of the things that's changing with Solarian, is that we're
Yeah.
all kind of picking pieces of it up, because it's too much for one person to do. And it's the reason that we've, that I think we go a little slower in the past than I would have liked to, because it was, with me doing all those things. I mentioned before that I've got ADHD, and, it's not, it's not an inconsequential thing to have.
Yeah.
And it can sometimes throw you off on things like that you need to do. So being able to rely on working as a team really helps with that.
Yeah, like Jayson when we had to set up the website, I took care of a good chunk of that, and then Jayson kind of came along and helped me finish it up, because he's a little better at WordPress than I am. But I did pretty much the grunt work and got it set up, got it in a decent place, and then Jayson came in and put the icing on it. So it was really nice that we did.
But I also knew when to go out and get somebody else and have them do some of it too.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That is the thing, is that and I've actually got an assistant who works with me to help me get a lot of that stuff done as well. So she's big, kind of an important part of that too.
Mm-hmm.
So your big project right now that just released is Top Secret New World Order. How did this happen?
Well, that's all me. That I'm going to take all the credit for that one.
Absolutely.
I really am, because this was this is something that goes all the way back to my childhood, right? So yeah, I will definitely take credit for bringing Merle back out of gaming retirement.
I was going to say, wow.
Yeah. So the thing is, Top Secret actually was my favorite game as a kid, even more than D&D. So Merle was to me what Gary Gygax was to a lot of people, right? In terms of this is the author that you like. And I didn't think about this until later, but so when I was a kid, I was always like, who is Merle Rasmussen? He's so mysterious, right?
Yeah.
Like he just he writes a spy game, and who is this guy?
Right. It comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. And so while we were doing Gygax Magazine, I was finally at a point where I knew enough people who would know him that I could say, can anybody, put me in touch, right? So Tim Cass gives me his number, and I call him up, and blah, blah, blah. We get going on it. I talk him into doing the game. That was great. But the thing that was kind of neat was when I first got in touch with Merle and we just started talking about everything, I mentioned that I thought he was this mysterious figure. I had no idea who he was. Turns out that our paths crossed constantly when I was a kid, and I had forgotten some of it. So for one thing, my game store was not, I grew up in a small town. We did not have a game store. We had to drive to Des Moines to do that, which is about a 2-hour drive from where I was, Des Moines, Iowa. And, like I said, very supportive parents. My granddad would drive me to Des Moines to go buy some gaming stuff. And the store that I would always go to, turns out that's where Merle worked. He worked in that game store. I was going in there buying stuff, and he just never said that he was Merle.
Way.
Yeah, he just never told me that he was the guy.
Was
right?
this was this post creation of the game or pre?
Yeah, because he created Top Secret when he was still in college at ISU.
Oh, okay.
He's pretty young. He was a college student when he was doing this stuff. So when Gary was 40, he was like 17. So he's also very humble. I mean, everybody likes to talk about their own stuff, but he's a modest guy. And so, he wasn't the sort of person where I'd come up and buy Top Secret and he'd be like, hey, this is me,
Right.
So I didn't even realize. But the other thing where we crossed paths was my very first gaming convention that I ever went to. I was like 15 years old. My parents let me drive to Omaha on my own, which is illegal. So I think I've passed the statute of limitations, but they were like, whatever,
Safely.
You can do it. Take your car, drive to Omaha. So I'm there by myself at this gaming convention. Never been at one before. It was put on it was called Omicon, and it was put on by like the Nebraska Society for the Advancement of Space Travel.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, right? So it was mostly a sci-fi convention. It was all sci-fi, but they had gotten Merle as the keynote speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And the sci-fi nerds didn't know who he was.
Right.
They didn't play Top Secret. They didn't care.
Yeah.
And so I was there at the thing. I went to see his keynote. I was the only person there.
Yeah.
There were literally no one but me showed up for the keynote, and Merle just went ahead and he just did it. He did his speech. And then afterwards he's like, any questions? I'm like,
right.
A lot of questions. And he hung out and talked to me for like an hour. And I don't know how I forgot about this. It had kind of like, the years go by, you forget things. But as Merle and I were talking, and the subject of the convention comes up, and he says, I remember there was a kid there. And I was like, oh my God, that was me. And he's like, and then we met in person, and he was like, "Yep, you're the kid."
It's like
you're
an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of like that. It was kind of like that Coca-Cola commercial where Refrigerator Perry or Mean Joe Green or whoever it is gives the
tosses him the towel.
Hey, kid. Right.
Yeah, because now actually Merle, because he saves everything, so he actually gave me his program guide from that convention. So he gave me all this stuff from it. I even have his name tag from the convention.
Oh my
It's really special to me.
That's
amazing.
So,
this was just a big thing for me because Top Secret was my favorite game. Merle's my favorite game designer. The idea of getting to do it again, because it needs to be updated. If you do a game that's set in the modern era, you've got to keep updating it for each new modern era. So, and Merle was completely into the idea. He, loved the idea of doing a new system, dove into all of the design sessions with all of us, spending a lot of time with James working through, as James came up with Lucky 13 and everything. And, just dove in and became part of the team, and it was amazing.
Was it scary working on, first of all, it's a game that obviously you love, but it's a game that lots of people really very much love. Like, was that a frightening experience? Like, James, you had mentioned that you had actually been, working on the systems yourself. Like, did you feel this great weight on your shoulders, or were you just like, I can do this?
No, actually, I was kind of more in the I can do this category, because
That
I remember
doesn't surprise me.
when Jayson asked me to join the project, the one thing I said to him is, I go, all right, I will. However, we're not going to use the system from the original Top Secret. No way. So that was kind of stamp my feet on the ground and go, this is how I come in. And I have a great picture, and I'll post it to Twitter or something at some point, of me and Merle. It has to be 10 o'clock at night, and he wanders out of his room. Jason's there sitting in a chair across from me. I'm on a couch and I'm working on the system, and Merle comes and sits next to me, and there's pictures of like Merle and I like looking down at the paper and everything. And I love those pictures, because that was just kind of a really intense, this is how hard we were working on it.
Yeah, a lot went into it. And the nice thing is, legally, we really had to make a whole new game too, because going back to what I said before about the difference between trademark and copyright, we own the trademark to Top Secret, but we don't own the copyright to the old game. So both Merle and also Alan Hammock, who was the original editor on Top Secret, both of them worked on the game. And we set a rule from the beginning that nobody was allowed to look at their old books. And the nice thing is that the reason that's so fine for Top Secret is that the difference between Top Secret and Top Secret SI, they're completely different games too. So it's not like some games where they go first edition, second, third, and there's a slow evolution. Top Secret SI is really a different game from Top Secret. And so Top Secret NWO is yet another game.
So, I have to say, it's interesting to me, because I was looking through the book itself, and what sort of fascinates me is that you've maintained the look and feel of the game. Maybe I don't,
the cover with the photography. Yeah, that was very intentional.
And I thought even the interior pages, I thought not exactly the same, but it reminded me a lot. Like, I don't have my original book is like in storage somewhere. I haven't looked at it.
Well, they definitely, it's a very different design, but I think there's certain things that I can see, like just the fact that we were fans of both the original Top Secret and SI. And by the way, Top Secret SI, which was actually written by Doug Niles, not by Merle, which is one reason it's a different game. But Doug Niles is also writing for us on the new Top Secret as well.
Oh, wow. So you kind of brought, and you kind of fused everything together in the telepod.
Well, he's actually he's just writing missions, but we have one of his missions that'll be coming out soon. But yeah, there's I'm going to hold the thing up again just because it's relevant here. That, I mean, if you compare, if we take the three boxes, right? I'll just get all three of them out and we'll do this. So you can kind of see an evolution between them in terms of the era too. So you got the first Top Secret game, very, very analog. There's it's got a real kind of 70s
Mm-hmm.
James Bond feel to that. And then when Top Secret SI happened, it became much more 80s. You know,
Right.
now you've got a computer and you've
Yeah.
got all, you know, a calculator and you've got all these things going on.
1980s sunglasses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. You know, you've got a digital watch that says Moscow, you know,
Right.
stuff like that. And so when we went to here, by going into the 21st century with
Right.
this in 2010s and stuff, I felt like we didn't want to get too much technology on the cover because it would look old really quick.
Yeah.
So we went back to a more analog kind of feel to it. But you know, it's not at all. None of these are copies of each other, but they do have the stylistic effect of saying, you know, this actually looks like things that you would find laying around in the spy's hotel room or something.
Right. Well, I can see just from talking to the three of you how much of an impact and like how much these games have shaped your lives and maybe steered you. And I mean, it may be kind of impossible to tell what, it may be a chicken and the egg situation, but what kind of impact maybe do you think the games that you guys are creating, or just games in general, have on people, or maybe what have they had on you? Do you think you're a different person for these games?
I think so. I think so. There's a lot that the gaming has helped me with in my career. The whole fact of planning ahead. So like when you're going to go in and like you're trying to tell a story, this creative, this collaborative story, right? You have to plan ahead. What are these characters going to do down the line? How the player is going to respond to this thing I'm putting in the dungeon, right? Or
Mhm.
I'm going to go on this adventure and they're saying that there's a dragon. So maybe I should go research dragons, blah, blah, blah. So all this stuff, right?
Mm.
Well, you're playing through scenarios in your head. Well, I do that in project management all the time. I sit down and I plan out my project, and I'm like, well, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and it's probably going to ship here. And when it ships here, I'm going to need guys there to like take care of this when it comes off the truck, right? So the stuff's going to come off a truck. It's going to go into a warehouse, and then it's going to sit in a warehouse. So do I need to make sure that the warehouse is weather controlled? Yeah, this
Mm.
stuff has weather control. Like I don't want it to get too hot or too cold or whatever. So all that stuff, all that planning and stuff, that's all stuff that I learned how to do from writing adventures and writing, and running games and being a player in games. So I think in a lot of ways it was pivotal that to my career, honestly, that it's made me a better at like planning out like my project management stuff.
Yeah, I think what you're kind of touching on here is something that I often see like in my kids, like when I'm teaching, and it starts at a much smaller level when obviously you're children, but it's this idea of completing tasks
Mm-hmm.
and sort of staying the course. And then maybe the longer the tasks get, or maybe the more complex they get, the more you need to sort of have patience and understanding that you whittle away at things as opposed to just sort of accomplishing them
Right.
by
And
snapping your
it's also
fingers.
good practice for like when players go off on their own track or an adventure doesn't go the way you plan it to, or they kill somebody they weren't supposed to kill. Like you get this like, okay, so what are we gonna do now? So I will, okay, and you think on your feet and stuff. So I do a lot of that at work. I'm into a lot, no project meets, survives contact with the enemy. So
Yeah.
the second a project starts, it already starts falling apart, right? And that's fine. That's nature of the beast. That's what happens. You make all these great plans, and then life doesn't care about your plans. So I think this does help you. You do help. It does help in preparing you to not only foresee things that are coming, but also react well when things do happen.
Mm. How do you feel, James? All these years have gone by, right? And you told me that when you were a teen, you're having trouble with the rules. You were having trouble, like maybe with keeping track of them. But now you're redesigning rules for games. Like how like is this something that you like? Are you enjoying yourself now, or do you feel like it's, oh God, it's just something I have to do?
No, it's kind of natural. I mean, so if we go back to the question of how it's changed me,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, critical thinking, math, social skills, there's so much I took with me from gaming throughout my life that I don't know, without it, I probably would be a completely different person. Also, I'm an instructional designer by trade. So I use gamification all the time, and a lot of my learning, a lot of, I've done stuff for corporations like Subway and smaller like a cable company out here that were basically D&D exercises and checklists and things like that, all in the disguise of corporate garb. And
Right.
they loved it. It's like, wow, it's like, well, so, but gamification is a big part of instructional design, using game theory in order to adult learning principles and things like that. So I think gaming taught me how to be who I am. And then when I figured out who I am and what I wanted to do, it continued to do so by having me introduce it into what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm. And change others, I think, maybe by it. Like it's really interesting to think about the idea of going in there and you're teaching in a way by sometimes I wonder if I'm using game techniques in the classroom or classroom techniques at the table when I'm like
Like
sometimes I
both.
get confused about what's what and like
Mhm.
basically it kind of comes down to transmitting information and making people understand and communicate and then responding and sort of understanding what someone else
Well, one
is
thing
trying
I'll
to tell
say
you.
too, and then I'll give it a turn over to Jayson, is that I work for an Ivy League university on the East Coast, and and I'm doing instructional design for them. And gamification's blowing their mind, and it's like it's so weird going.
Hmm.
You are a
Yeah,
500-year-old institution, and you just learning about gamification. That's crazy.
I'm wondering now which one because I wonder if it's the one across the
I'll tell
street
you
from
off.
me.
I'll
Yeah, we'll
I'll
talk
tell you
about
off
it
screen. Yeah,
afterward.
yeah.
How about you, Jason? Any
Yeah, it's
thoughts?
funny because some of the things you're saying, I would just agree right off the board with. So I'm a product designer, and what that kind of entails is that I've crossed between both user experience design and product management and things like that. And surprisingly, game design has taught me to let go of the product more than anything else has, because with any product you design, you're used to the fact you're going to put it out in the world and people are going to use it the way they're going to use it. But especially with something like a role-playing game,
Mm,
you see how far they stray from your vision,
mm,
and they should, right? Like you're not,
yeah,
I mean, if your game is forcing them to play exactly the way you told them to,
yeah.
then it's not a very good game. And so learning to let go and learning to follow your customers or your
Hmm.
users or your players or whatever you call them, depending on what industry is a really valuable lesson, especially for somebody who's got the kind of control that as a product designer you want to have control, and so learning to
Right,
let go is really important.
right.
Yeah. Hey, talk about gamification. I get to show. I'm going to show you.
I was
You're getting
wondering what you went to get.
Yeah, you're getting exclusive here. I finally got clearance to show this. Okay, so I work for the Army. I work for the U.S. Army. I develop prototypes. So one of our customers came to us. Now I work in the one of the things I'm doing now. My team now creates videos and we do some virtual reality, some augmented reality, videos and graphics and animated like interactive apps and stuff. But one of the guys came to us and wanted us to make a board game. Now, this is before I was on
Oh,
this
wow.
team. The guy that used to run this team came to me right away and said, "You're the only one here who's qualified to do this." He's like, "You're probably the most qualified person on this base to make this board game." Because I'd made board games before,
Hmm.
right? So we made a board game for the Army. This is it here. It's called H Hour. Look at this thing.
Is
Look
that
at
a
that.
wait? Is that an exclusive only for the Army? Can we go out
Yep.
and we
No,
can't buy that?
this is you can only get this from a group called the MRICD, and it's a
That's so
Saberni,
cool.
so it's chem biological radioactive nuclear. What this is if there's an event
Yeah,
that happens, and people are exposed, like I don't know, maybe let's say a chlorine plant explodes and
yeah.
chlorine gas goes everywhere, and a whole bunch of people are exposed, or somebody sets off a dirty bomb in a stadium.
Mm,
The Army will show up, they'll set up a field, and they'll decon people, and they'll move them from a contaminated position to a decontaminated position, and then it's like a red, yellow, green zone.
mm,
And then once they get in the green zone, then they can take them to a hospital, because hospitals are not they're not prepared to deal with mass casualty biological agent or whatever. So
mm.
they come out, they set this up. This kit lets them role play because that's a
Oh,
hybrid thing because you
wow.
kind of role play it.
Yeah,
They
right.
role play setting that up on a board and running patients through it. So just real quick, I'm glad I get to share this. I've never been able to share this
I
with
am
anyone.
glad you get to share that
So,
too. That's
so,
awesome.
so there's all these components and cards and a CD and a map and all kinds of things. These are the patient cards, and these are real
Oh,
patient cards. These are
wow.
the ones that the medical folks actually use. And
Yeah.
when you wind up in there, with a medical
Mhm.
person on the field, this card travels with you. They stick this to you, and it tells whoever's looking at it, what's wrong
Right.
with you? Okay, and they look at this, and then they could check off like how you're progressing,
Yeah.
right? These are in the game, and when they play the game, they actually get these and they move people across the board with this card and describe how they're treating them and stuff.
How
It's
long
just
did it
really
take
cool.
to
I'm just
develop that? Was that
all this.
just you, or were you with a
No,
team?
no, 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 no. I have a whole team. I had a whole team of folks, whole team of professional animators. No, this thing was like hundreds of thousands of dollars involved in making this. This is not something that anyone could just make. This is all like super high end. We had 280 of them made. That box is super high construction. All the
Right.
materials in there are like weatherproof and stuff. No, James and Jason, this would be like a dream thing. Like
I just did a quick calculation, so it cost what, $5,000 per board game.
No, because there was development. Yes, I guess if you look at it from a non-recurring engineering, so your NRE fees and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, that's probably about right.
That's a $5,000 board game you got.
I know.
Wow.
Holy
To
cow.
actually produce these, the physical production, once all that was done, they're about $280 a piece.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It's the Army's
this
version.
It's a cool through line to gaming in general, because all the gaming we do goes back to wargaming.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And wargaming
true.
comes from the army, because it was
Right.
the Prussian army with, von Clausewitz
Yep.
Kriegspiel. I don't know
Yep.
if it was von Clausewitz, but one of those Vons with Kriegspiel that started it all, and people still play that game. So
Yeah.
you're keeping the tradition going.
Where do you guys
Yeah.
where do you want to see gaming go in the future?
Von Reiswitz, not von Clausewitz.
There you go.
Yeah, Clausewitz was the one that wrote the strategy thing or something. I don't know. I'm not in the army. I should know these things.
I can tell you from a professional level, and I'm hoping this is a gateway to it. The Army's starting to see a lot of value in board gaming, right? The leadership who's seen this game already are already talking about more and expanding it and talking to other folks. It's being received exceptionally well. People are just like, they're like, I love this. And it's like, yeah, well, studies show that people learn from gaming. Like they really learn from gaming.
Well, that's play is. As children, play is just our way of learning how to become adults.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm hoping that games get out more in the industry for folks, especially like in the Army and stuff, to train like on a higher level and keep retention. People like when you put a game, he said to the guy I delivered all these to, he says, you can't imagine. He's like, we're in class and we're talking about all this stuff and he's like, he's seen people's eyes glaze over and he's just like, whatever, blah, blah, blah. He says he pulls out that box and every eye goes boing. Right. And it's just like, and he says, I can see them. They all check in. Right. And he says, they don't check out until that box is closed.
Yeah.
He's like, it's amazing.
It catches people in a way that, I mean, everybody has a different learning style, but for the most part, I believe it catches people in a way that's much, much different than a standard lecture or something like that.
Well, James, you do teaching materials, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think, like, from gaming in like gaming like that in like regular workplaces? So like I don't know, like you used to work at Subway, right? And like, would you have been able to use something like that there? Or
yeah, actually, when I did, they used to love to have me design their large events when they go to Florida and things like that, to do large group meetings, because I would end up designing their activities.
Right.
And their activities were always very gamified. There'd be card components, role-playing components, going off and becoming characters and interacting with each other. So they used to love that. And honestly, I think I designed activities for 3 of their major conventions, like 1 in Europe and 2 in the US.
Wow.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the key kind of things with games in general is the level of engagement when a game is well designed. you are engaged at all moments. And this is just sort of like, at least as far as I feel like when I'm a game master, because sometimes when I do that old thing they say not to do, which is split the party, I sort of start thinking in my brain on two levels. On one level, I'm trying to make it engaging for the people that I'm running the session for, but I'm also trying to engage somehow by with trickery or maybe with my hand gestures or by, the way I speak or perhaps references or elbows to like their elbows, trying to keep those people not in the immediate game also engaged. So it's like this new level. And I think
Mhm.
creating those sorts of things, James, as you say, is like super, like it's a valuable skill that I think not a lot of people unfortunately are as good with as I believe more people should be.
Well, as a teacher, I mean, do you follow stuff like what Jeffrey Canada or John Hunter do with games?
I am not even familiar with who those guys are.
Well, so John Hunter, there's a great TED talk. I'll just look him up sometime. He did a thing called the World Peace Game, where he creates this sort of three-dimensional game. You'll get different stacks on the board, and you've got the planet there, and you're basically trying to figure out how to um, make a planet work. And
Right.
it's a game that he plays with, everything from grade school to high school kids
Yeah.
for this. It kind of comes a little bit out of Bucky Fuller's World Game, where the game it was sort of like a game where it was Bucky Fuller said, how do you take a war game and turn
Hmm.
it into a peace game where the
Hmm.
goal is to make as many people happy on the planet as possible?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You know,
I actually regularly I've been using for quite a few years now, like at least 4 or 5 years. I've been using all kinds of forms of role-playing game, board game in my classroom. And
that's
essentially what I
great.
try to do is tie together, the easy thing to do is to tie together social studies and language arts. Those
Mhm.
two go together very, very well in like a gaming environment. And I would actually run they'd probably be called like mini LARPs in my
Mhm.
Oh, cool.
classroom if I'm running
Yeah.
for like third graders. I actually so for example, I was teaching for about 5 years in Alaska. And so just recently, what I was doing before I moved here to Cambridge is I was actually running LARPs for my third and fourth graders to teach them about like the development of the state, and they would take on the roles of different characters, and then I would be the game master, and I would sort of game master them through the history, keeping the spirit alive while maybe the facts are a little bit different because they're sort of creating their own paths. But
Yeah,
I would do stuff like that all the time, and that's what I would, you know, I'd love to see it used and employed more in schools, like
it makes
for
total sense. And I
games.
think to James's point, I think that's something that's probably going to keep happening more and more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if it does, I think it means more people are going to be able to do like those things that James was doing, and it won't be like so difficult to find people to do them.
Yeah,
Um, well, guys, I very much appreciate your time. It's been a wonderful discussion. I've kept you a little bit longer than I said we were going to be, but I do appreciate your answers and your thoughts and ideas. This has been really a really great discussion, and I very much appreciate it.
Good. Well,
Um,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
no, thank you for coming on. For all of you watching at home, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please do like and subscribe. It at least makes me feel better about what I'm doing. I am doing this as my evening sort of fun, and it's nice to know when people are enjoying it and getting something out of it out there as well. So to all of you out there, thank you very much for watching. And once again, thank you very much to my guests tonight, Solarian
thank
Games.
you.
All of their information, if I highly recommend, it's all in the description below. Please do check them out. They're making some really cool stuff and doing some cool things. So to each and every one of you, have a very good night.
Thank you.